So the first cutter that you see there is a C95 cutter. I'm going to move it out of the way for 1 second, Brent. So that cutter weighs 45 pounds. The cutter that you see in the center weighs 47 pounds. And this big monster over here is the baddest cutter on the planet at the moment. This is our new F7 cutter, the only cutter capable of making F7 material cuts. This cutter weighs 61 pounds. The bigger cutting forces that you're going to run into on the new steels of the vehicles that are out there now are going to require larger and larger piston sizes and heavier duty cutters. Somebody who's Cami size is probably going to struggle with a 61-pound cutter. Somebody who's Anthony's size is not going to have a problem with that whatsoever. It's not the everyday cutter that you're going to use or that any fire departments really have on their trucks. This is really a specialized unit. Some of the other cutters, the little bit of a smaller size cutter, Cam, go ahead and grab that one. Brent, I'm going to have you grab the 240, and Anthony, go ahead and grab the 270. So this is the way most people stand at an extrication scene, waiting for their cutters to be used. The big thing you want to keep in mind is the only thing that gets tired at an extrication scene is you, regardless of the cutter size and model that you have. So one of the things you want to keep in mind is always keep your cutter blades open and ready to go. And as long as they're in the open and ready to go position, you can literally just drop the tips right down on the ground. You're going to stay a lot fresher longer when you're doing that, okay? The handles are adjustable on these tools, and we want to keep in mind that you want to kind of match the cutter that you have to the person. It'd be difficult, like I said, for Cami to maneuver a 61-pound tool, but it's still possible, okay? So we're going to put those down for a second. We're also going to talk about spreaders for just a little bit. Cam, I'm going to have you come right over here. So when you're sizing spreaders for your department also, you want to keep in mind the capabilities of the people that you have in your department. If you have somebody who's Anthony's size, larger and heavier spreaders really aren't a problem whatsoever. If you have people that are smaller stature, maybe a smaller spreader might be better for you, okay? Again, keep in mind that you want your spreader tips always to be completely closed. This is a 24-inch spreader. This is a 32-inch spreader. Our 24-inch spreader weighs 38 pounds. Our 54-inch spreader weighs 46 pounds. It's not a tremendous amount of difference, but you want to keep all that in mind when you're sizing tools for your department. So let's talk about cutting just a little bit, okay? Let's walk around to the far side over there. Brent, if you'd be so kind to grab me that cutter. You got the shot, man? Thanks. We're going to grab this one too so we get a nice little close-up. So one of the things that you want to be careful of when you're using your cutters is exactly where you're making your cuts. Hold on 1 second. So if you're cutting from this side and you have no idea what's going on in here, if you look inside to the opposite side, you'll see that we have an adjustable seatbelt mount right here. When you have an adjustable seatbelt mount, you're going to have some type of track. Now, depending on the manufacturer, that track could go all the way down and go all the way up. You're not going to have an easy time cutting through a bolt like this, keeping in mind that this goes up and down. You're probably not going to have a great time cutting through a bolt like that either. So if you're starting to make your cut and the cutter kind of stalls out just a little bit, you may want to maneuver up or down just a little bit, okay? So let's take a look at our cuts. All right, Brent. Depending on your cutter, and this is where you want to experiment a little bit, okay? We're going to look at our post. Some people like to cut and they'll say it's best to cut with the high side high. Brent, would you be able to make that cut for me? And stop right there. So what we want to take note of is how does the cutter that you have in your department react if you start with your high side high? Does your cutter walk itself up? Does it continue to walk itself down? Okay, just go ahead and give a cut. Now you guys can see from Matt's angle. Go ahead, make your cut. That the blades wound up basically horizontal. So now I'm going to have Anthony back up a little bit. Now we're going to cut a little bit different. Now we're going to cut in the opposite direction. Let's see what our blades do now. And stop right there. So you could see what angle we started with, and you could see what angle, how that tool naturally rotated itself up a little bit. We always like to say that it's usually best if you cut straight across at a 90-degree angle to what you're cutting. So we get a little bit of rotation, but not a tremendous amount. These are things that you want to go out and practice at your own department. So when you're doing this, get to the junkyard, take a look, let everybody in your department cut a couple of times, start on one angle, start on the other angle, start on the third angle. Remember, this is not a speed evolution. This is, let's see the way our cutters operate, especially if you have smaller or older cutters, okay? Believe it or not, you can actually bend the blades on those cutters. So if you guys have ever been cutting in an extrication scene or just in practice, and you watch your blades separate and open, that's one of two things. Either your blades are bent because you can actually bend them out, and that's usually by getting them to rotate out constantly. Your center bolt is loosened up. It's not torqued down to the right specs, okay? That's number two. Actually, I guess there's a third. When you open your blades up and you see a bunch of little like mushrooms and bumps and things like that, all those mushrooms and bumps will not allow your blades to cut cleanly across. Every time that mushroom hits, you're going to see your tips separate. So if you've had a lot of incidents where you're making your cut and all of a sudden your blades rotate and turn really, really severely and you see those blades separate, make sure your guys stop immediately, open your cutters up, go in a little bit deeper if at all possible, and try to get that cut as straight as possible. That's going to be one of the keys for cutting with you. So we're going to come to this side, Brent. I'm going to have you cut a little bit down here. Here's the other thing that we want to look at. I'm going to turn this on. So here's our seatbelt pre-tensioner. Mind you that a lot of times this is hidden in plastic, okay? We know that with the exception of a Volvo, where the seatbelt pre-tensioner charge is up a little bit higher, most of the time the manufacturers have the charge put right down into here. And if you take a look right here, you can see this little yellow clip is the firing mechanism for the pre-tensioner. What we don't want to do is cut into that. Now, I know you're going to say, well, how am I supposed to see that if there's a lot of plastic there? That I can't tell you. You may want to try to get this plastic popped out of the way. Sometimes, unfortunately, you're just going to have to cut in there. So the lower you're going to be able to cut, the better it's going to be, okay? If you can get in there and take a peek from the back side, see literally anything, that may be the best thing for your cutter to do. So Brent, let's go ahead and get ready to position that cut. Okay, start to make your cut and stop if you would. And stop right there. So, Anthony, would you be so kind to give me that New York hook, please? This is where some people are going to run into trouble. Depending on the manufacturer, and I know you can do it with ours, that's not going to be an issue. I'm not going to necessarily recommend this for anybody else's equipment. But if you see that your tool is walking in towards the car itself, and you can see how this tool is basically center lining itself into, and this happens with everyone's tool, happens with everybody's tool, especially corded tools, you have to be careful. So if you see that's going to happen, one of the things that you can do is before you put your cutter into place, Brent, go ahead and back me out. You can take a steel New York hook on Genesis tools, and you want to make sure it's from the rocker panel to the roof line. You can put that in the body of our tool and it will stop that drift of the actual tool itself. Now, I'm not going to recommend you do this with any of the other manufacturer's tools. I'm just telling you, this is something you can do to stop that inward rotation. Brent, go ahead and make that cut for me if you'd be so kind. Perfect. Good. Now, depending on the strength of the car, point up at me for a second, Matt. So depending on the strength of the car, you can actually bend one of these if there's enough force in the cut area that you're making. I had one on my truck in Northeast Ohio for many, many, many years, and I bent the crap out of it on a 2015 Ford Excursion, I believe it was. All right, Brent, let's come in and finish that cut. Make sure that somebody's holding on to that piece. Now, take a look at the difference. You can see how that tool is walking itself in. Go ahead. That's one of those really critical things, especially if you have a patient in that passenger compartment. And I'm sure you guys have all seen that where the tool has walked all the way in. Extremely important that your people are cognizant of where they're standing and how that tool shuts off. This is no denigration of anybody else's equipment, but if you have a throttle control type grip, if you're right-handed, most of the time the operational mode of that tool is away from your body. Most firefighters focus on the working ends of the tools. They're watching the cutters cut, they're watching the spreader spread, and they pay no attention to where their operational hand is. So if you have pigtails coming out the back and that tool walks itself in, you have a potential for snapping a pigtail off. If you have your hand caught in that position, depending on how you position the cutter to start, which we'll talk about on the far side just a little bit more, but there's a potential that your hand is going to get caught in there. If that happens, the tool doesn't know that you're caught. The tool knows it's on. So you want to be extremely cognizant of that, because not only do you have to get your hand to come back to get the tool to stop moving inward direction, but then you have to reverse the direction to get that tool to release its grip on the steel that you're cutting. So these are things you want to keep in mind. Just be extremely cognizant, not only of the working ends of the tool itself, but also of your operational control hand, just for the safety of the operator itself. So let's come over here and take a look at our seat back. Can I have my camera there, Cody? Thank you, sir. So, come on in here, Matt. So, we've gone ahead and already removed all this seat back material for you. And again, you're not going to do this in the real world, not to this extent. Hopefully you're going to do a little bit, because you want to be able to determine what type of material is down here. Now, these hinges are usually a harder type of steel, not necessarily the hardened or the ultra hardened strength, but a harder type of material, okay? You want to try to determine how it looks on the inside and potentially how it looks from the backside, okay? If you take a look right here, you'll see that we have an extra support bracket. Now, just cutting blindly through here, depending on how you cut, sometimes one cutter will go underneath on one side and then come up on the opposite side. That means that our seat will not be completely cut out. It will literally still be attached by some way, shape, or form. If you can take a knife and get some of this crap out of your way so you can see what's here, a lot of times it'll be better, okay? The other thing you want to watch out for is make sure you're not catching a pyrotechnic charge. So I'm going to come around to the back side, and Brent's going to position his cutter in there. And stop right there. So you can see that right now, literally all we have are the tips onto the hardened steel. Depending on how that material is inside the seat, and we never know because this is manufacturer specific, most people will slide their cutter in at a little bit of an exaggeration. If your blade comes in like this, guaranteed they're not going to dig into this material very, very easily whatsoever, and your tool will immediately rock itself upward. That's where you run the chance of a side load. And again, this is not just on a Genesis tool, this is on any manufacturer's tool. When you see your blades twist suddenly, stop, reposition, and get a deeper bite in. The other reason you want to kind of get some of this stuff out of your way is to see, where am I going to cut the easiest? What's in the best interest of my patient? And remember, everything we do at extrication is always patient's condition and position dictated. If they need to get out super, super fast, we need to get them out as fast as humanly possible. If we've got a little bit of time to play, let's try not to jostle them as much as possible. So Brent, I'm going to have you come up and just kind of slide up through here. So you can see how deep that bite is. Go ahead and make my cut right there if you'd be so kind. Perfect. So you can see where we cut through. We handle that with no difficulty whatsoever. When we try to cut down here, you're going to get a lot more of that rotation, and that is unavoidable just because the way the seat is manufactured, either with that round coil spring in there or some other type of mechanism. Now the tough part for us is if you take a look at the inside here, which is kind of dark to look at, but it's almost impossible to get in there. So can we maneuver this seat backwards a little bit? Yeah, we may be able to, but take a look here. See how my cut here is still intact? That's not going to allow me to move that seat all the way backwards. The visualization of the material that you're cutting is paramount to getting your patient out in the proper position and condition. We want to make the right cuts at every time all the way around in the extrication process. Okay, Brent, anything to add for that?
Nope, that's very good.